In my line of work, the threats are usually very clear. I know who my enemies are and what they want. But when I come home, I have to face a different kind of enemy. My wife's family, the powerful Ashford dynasty, they don't use guns or bombs. Their weapons are control, manipulation, and contempt hidden behind a facade of politeness. When the most dangerous battlefield is in your own home, how do you fight against your family to protect that very family? 9 months in the Hindu Kush, the air smelled only of dust and gunpowder. When the C-130 landed in Coronado, the only thing I smelled was the salt of the sea. It was the smell of coming home, but that feeling didn't last long. Just a few hours later, I realized I had traded one battlefield for another. Our house in Coronado was as quiet as I remembered, but the atmosphere inside was not. Ilara, my wife, hugged me tightly, but I could feel the tension in her every muscle. She was thinner, her waist was smaller, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't completely hide. That evening, we drove to La Jolla, to the Ashford family's mansion. It was like a fortress of glass and concrete, cold and perfect. Sterling Ashford, my father-in-law, shook my hand with just enough pressure to assert his authority. He patted me on the shoulder, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Welcome back, hero," he said, his voice booming. "Is the adventure in uniform over?" I just nodded. Arguing with Sterling was as useless as trying to stop the tide. He was a powerful investor, a man who believed a person's worth was measured by the balance in his bank account. I, a Navy SEAL captain, was clearly a losing investment in his eyes. My mother-in-law, Meredith, was different. She was a master of the art of silent psychological warfare. She glided over, elegant in a silk dress, and gave me a perfunctory hug. "Caleb, welcome home safely," she said, her voice as smooth as velvet. But her eyes weren't. They were sharp as razors, scanning me, evaluating my clothes, my demeanor, and perhaps the invisible scars I had brought back. She wasn't looking at a son-in-law. She was assessing a potential threat to her perfect order. Dinner was as usual. Sterling monopolized the conversation with his multi-million-dollar deals. Meredith skillfully steered the conversation. Across from us were Declan, my brother-in-law, and his wife, Serafina. Both were silent, almost non-existent, only nodding when necessary. They looked tired, like people who were used to living in a too large shadow. For a brief moment, when Sterling was engrossed in some deal, I caught a quick glance from Serafina to her husband. It wasn't a normal look, but a look filled with deep resignation and despair, before it was quickly extinguished, and she looked down at her plate again, a small crack in a seemingly perfect surface. Ilara was silent, only occasionally glancing at me, a look of both love and worry. The pressure in that room was so tangible I could feel it pressing on my chest, and I knew it had been weighing on Ilara for the past 9 months. When dinner ended, Sterling put down his wine glass and looked straight at me. This was when the main act began. "Next week," he announced, "the Ashford Group will host its 30th anniversary gala. At the same time, we will officially announce the new Defense Endowment Fund, a major event." He paused, waiting for my attention. "The presence of a hero like you will make the ceremony even more meaningful, Caleb." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command wrapped in cellophane. I had to be there, as a living symbol of the Ashfords' generosity. A pawn on their chessboard. I looked at Ilara. She wasn't looking at me, but stared intently at the empty plate in front of her. I turned back to Sterling. "I'll be there," I said, my voice calm. "It would be my honor." Sterling smiled with satisfaction. Meredith also smiled. A smile I knew the meaning of. The game had begun, and I knew, as they did, that I had no choice but to play. But they didn't know one thing. I wasn't playing for a draw. I was playing to win. The week passed quickly. For me, it was like the planning phase before a mission. Studying the terrain, identifying targets, and predicting enemy actions. Alara grew increasingly anxious. One night, I saw her looking at old photos. They did this to Alistair, she whispered, almost to herself. Alistair Finch. Her former fiancé, a talented surgeon. I had heard that name before. Did what? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Ilara flinched, quickly putting the photos away. Nothing, honey. It's just an old story. Her evasive answer told me more than a long explanation could. I didn't ask further. I had a new piece of information. I filed it away in my mind. The night of the party, I wore the perfectly tailored suit the Ashfords had gifted me. It fit like a suit of armor. The hotel where the party was held was a blaze of lights and filled with predators in expensive outfits. Sterling was at the center of it all, like a king in his court. After a long speech about the Ashford Group's legacy, he turned towards me. And now, he boomed, his voice full of fake pride. I want to invite a true American hero to the stage. My son-in-law, Captain Caleb Thorne. The spotlight shone directly on me. I walked up, keeping my face expressionless. It was a trap. I knew it. Immediately, a few journalists from the front row's people I knew were close to Sterling began asking questions. Captain, there's a suggestion that PTSD is a serious issue in the military. What's your experience with it? What do you think about collateral damage in modern warfare? The questions were booby-trapped, designed to put me on the spot, to make me look like an unstable person or a heartless war machine. I answered each one, briefly, calmly, using the exact words I had been trained to use in military press briefings. I gave them nothing they wanted. When the interrogation ended, I stepped off the stage, and that's when Meredith appeared. She approached, graceful as a cobra, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. You handled that well, Caleb, she said, a warm, fake smile on her lips. She handed me a glass, a special glass for the man who made my daughter wait. The words had 2 layers of meaning, one for the public, one for me alone. I took the glass. Under the chandelier lights, I noticed an extremely thin, almost invisible film of oil, floating on the surface of the amber liquid. They had underestimated me. I held the glass, my eyes fixed on Meredith. Thank you, I said. I turned and walked toward Sterling, who was busy receiving congratulations. The crowd was moving, creating a controlled chaos. It was the perfect cover. I approached my father-in-law, raising my glass as if to toast. Congratulations on your success, Sterling. In a single, smooth movement, as our hands reached out, I swapped my glass with his. His eyes were looking away, preoccupied with an important guest. My hands, trained to disassemble weapons in the dark, performed the action instinctively. I stepped back, holding the new glass. I looked at Meredith from a distance. She was smiling, a triumphant smile. She didn't know that the trap she had set was no longer for me. Time seemed to slow down. In missions, we called this the dead silence, the moment after the trap has been set, and before the target falls into it. I stood in a corner, watching Sterling move through the crowd, holding the poisoned glass. He took a large sip, then another, the smile still on his face. Meredith stood not far away, her eyes occasionally flicking towards me, waiting. She must have been wondering why I was still standing. 20 minutes. That was my estimate. Sterling went up to the podium again, perhaps to give a closing speech. He began to speak, his voice still booming. But then, in the middle of a sentence, he paused. His eyes blinked repeatedly. And the Ashford Group's legacy? He stammered, his voice suddenly slurring. An awkward silence fell over the room. Sterling shook his head, as if to clear a thought. He tried to continue, but only managed to make unintelligible sounds. His hand trembled, making the wine glass shake. Then, to the horror of hundreds of eyes, his body collapsed, heavily like a felled tree. Screams erupted. Chaos broke out. Meredith was the fastest to react. Her face was pale, but her voice still gave sharp commands. Security. Call a doctor. Clear the way. She rushed onto the stage, her eyes scanning the crowd, looking for me. When our eyes met, her triumph was gone, replaced by panic and a flash of terrifying recognition. She knew. She knew something had gone wrong. While everyone was focused on the stage, I moved in the opposite direction. No one paid attention to me. I walked to the table where I had stood earlier and placed Sterling's glass down, then picked up my original, safe glass. I discreetly wrapped it in a napkin and put it in the inner pocket of my jacket. This was the evidence. The hotel security quickly formed a cordon, blocking all cameras. They took Sterling to a private room. Meredith followed, but before she disappeared behind the door, she looked back at me one more time. That look was no longer one of suspicion. It was certainty, an unspoken declaration of war. Alara ran to my side, her face pale with fear. Dad, what happened to Dad? I don't know, I said truthfully. Maybe he just overworked himself. We left the party in the chaos. As we reached the door, one of Meredith's assistants stopped us. He relayed his boss's message. Mrs. Ashford asked me to thank you for attending, Captain. And she said, it's a good thing you're still thinking clearly. I looked the assistant straight in the eyes. Tell Mrs. Ashford, I replied, my voice icy, that I am always thinking clearly. The very next morning I drove to the lab of Marcus Cole, a former Marine forensic specialist. I trusted him more than anyone. No paperwork, Marcus, I said as I handed him the wrapped glass. Just need to know what's in it, as fast as you can. He nodded, asking no questions. Old soldiers understand each other. 2 days later, my phone rang. Marcus's voice was serious. Cal, this isn't a joke. Synthetic benzodiazepine. A new kind. Won't kill you, but it's enough to knock you out. Causes disorientation, slurred speech. Looks exactly like someone who's on heavy drugs. I hung up. The plan was clear. My medal ceremony was coming up. A staged scandal would ruin my career. It was a precise attack, leaving no trace. That evening I saw Alara sitting silently in the living room. Mom said Dad was just exhausted, she said, her voice full of doubt. Do you believe that? I asked. She was silent for a long time, then looked at me, her eyes welling up with tears. When Alistair and I were engaged, Mom didn't like him. Then suddenly, there were rumors. No one knew where they came from, but they ruined him. Back then, I believed Mom. My silence was the answer. She had pieced the puzzle together herself. The next day, I went to see Alistair Finch. He was working at a small clinic, far from the Ashfords' high society world. He looked tired, older than in the old photos. I placed Marcus's report on the table between us. I think the Ashfords tried to use this on me. Alistair glanced at the report, without any surprise. Just the weariness of a man who had fought and lost. Welcome to the club, he said, a bitter smile flashing across his lips. For me, they didn't even need chemicals. Just a few well-placed lies were enough. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me as if seeing his younger self. Do you think you're the first person they wanted to eliminate because they couldn't control you, Captain? Anyone who threatens their perfect world must be removed. No exceptions. The Ashfords' mask had completely shattered. They weren't just overbearing controllers. They were destroyers, operating with the precision and ruthlessness of a combat unit. And I had just been confirmed as the next target. Alistair confirmed the method. Marcus confirmed the weapon. I was still missing the direct, irrefutable evidence to confront them. That came on a Tuesday afternoon, in a plain brown envelope with no return address, just my name written in block letters. Inside was a cheap USB stick. There was no message. I didn't plug it into any of my devices. In the military, a strange device like this could be a digital bomb, designed to wipe out everything. Instead, I drove to a small old internet cafe. in a neighborhood I was sure the Ashfords would never set foot in. I paid in cash, chose a computer in a hidden corner, and used specialized software to open the USB. In a safe, virtual environment, a digital sandbox, where any malicious code would be isolated and couldn't do any harm. Inside were 2 video files. The first file was a security camera footage from behind the bar. I saw Meredith, calm and elegant. She held a small vial, almost invisible in her palm. A quick flick of the wrist, and the liquid flowed into the wine glass. No hesitation, no emotion. It was like an expert performing a job that was all too familiar. The second file was the decisive one. Footage from a hidden camera, probably in the private room they had taken Sterling to. After he collapsed, Sterling was awake, sitting in a chair, while Meredith paced back and forth. "Why didn't it work?" Sterling growled, holding his head. Meredith stopped and turned to face her husband. Her voice was as cold as ice. "It did work, just not on the right person." The boy swapped the glasses. "I told you this was too risky." "What's riskier than letting him take Alara away?" Meredith retorted. "He's not a bad guy, Sterling, but he'll take her away from our world, from our protection. Do you want to lose our daughter?" She stepped closer. "We built this empire to protect our family. Anyone who threatens it must be eliminated." The evidence was here, cold and irrefutable. Only now did I start to question, who sent it? I scanned the list of people in the Ashfords' orbit. Who had the motive to go against Meredith, but was too afraid to act openly? Who would risk everything in a silent and desperate act? The list was very short. In fact, it had only one name: Serafina, my sister-in-law. I remembered her face at dinner that night, the look of someone who had endured for too long and was at her breaking point. This was the only way she could fight. A desperate act from an ally in the shadows. I copied the files to my own encrypted hard drive, then wiped all traces of my activity on the public computer. I broke the strange USB in half and threw the pieces into 2 different trash cans on my way home, leaving no trace. That evening, when Alara came home, I was sitting in the living room. I didn't say anything. I just opened my laptop, connected the hard drive, and turned the screen towards her. I pressed play. She watched the first video, her face turning white. She put her hand to her mouth. A stifled sob caught in her throat. That can't be Mom," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Then I played the second video. When Meredith said the last sentence, I saw something in Alara's eyes break. Her innocence, her belief, or perhaps the image of a perfect family she had tried to hold on to her whole life. She sat motionless in silence for a very long time after the screen went black. I didn't rush her. This was her fight, an internal battle more intense than anything I had ever faced. Finally, she took a deep breath, a shaky breath, as if trying to hold on to the last of her strength. She didn't look at me, but into the space in front of her, as if replaying her entire life. "Alistair," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They ruined him, and now they tried to do that to you." Then she turned, looking me straight in the eyes. The innocence was completely gone, replaced by a cold resolve I had never seen in her before. It was the toughness of a person who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. "I'm with you," she said, her voice clear and firm. "It's time for this to end." Now I had the most important ally. The fight was no longer just mine. Alara made the call. Her voice was frighteningly calm. "Mom, Dad, I think we need to have a family dinner. All of us. Tomorrow night." The silence on the other end must have been heavy. I imagined Meredith calculating. An invitation from Alara, not from me, meant her daughter could still be saved. They would agree. It was a chance for them to regain control. The next evening, we returned to the Ashford fortress. This time, I didn't come empty-handed. I brought my laptop, my weapon. The atmosphere in the living room was more tense than any mission briefing. Sterling tried to act normal, talking about the stock market. Meredith played the perfect hostess, asking Serafina about trivial things. Declan looked like he was about to throw up. Alara sat beside me, her back straight, silent. She was no longer a victim. She was my ally. I let their charade play out for a few minutes. Then, I stood up and walked to their state-of-the-art entertainment system. I opened my laptop. "Caleb, what the hell are you doing?" Sterling asked, his voice irritated at being interrupted. I didn't look at him. I plugged the HDMI cable into my device. The giant television screen, usually used for blockbuster movies, was now connected to my device. "Just a family movie night, Sterling," I said, my voice calm. I pressed play. The first video appeared. The scene of Meredith, graceful and cold, pouring poison into the wine glass. The room fell, silent. I could hear Serafina's horrified gasp. Sterling looked as if he had just been punched in the stomach. Meredith was the one who broke the silence. "This is a forgery," she said, her voice high and fawning. "He's trying to manipulate you. He wants to divide our family." I didn't say anything. I just pressed play on the second video. Their own voices filled their perfect living room. It did work, just not on the right person. The boy swapped the glasses. "Do you want to lose our daughter? Anyone who threatens it must be eliminated." When the video ended, no one said a word. The curtain had fallen on the play. Sterling slumped into his chair, his face gray. This time, Serafina didn't just gasp. She burst into tears. The sobs she had held back for years. "None of us are living our own lives," she whispered through her tears. Declan, who had been silent, finally spoke. He stared at his parents, his eyes empty. "Am I just a decoration for a family that looks good on paper?" To Sterling and Meredith's astonishment, Declan stood up. He walked to Serafina, who was still crying, and gently took her hand. For the first time, I saw that he was no longer his father's shadow. "Let's go, honey," he said, his voice still shaky, but full of determination. "We're done." He didn't look at his parents anymore, just led Serafina up and walked out of the room with her. The door closed behind them, the sound like a final period for years of submission. All eyes turned to Meredith. She had lost. All her pawns had been revealed. But she didn't collapse. No. People like Meredith never collapse. She looked at me, not with the eyes of a loser, but with the eyes of a fanatic proclaiming her faith. "You won today, Caleb," she said, her voice hissing with contempt. "But remember, this world isn't built on self-respect. It's built on power and control." Meredith's declaration still hung in the air, cold and venomous. I didn't reply. I just took the USB out of my laptop and placed it on the marble coffee table. "The original," I said briefly. Sterling looked up, with the tired eyes of a king who had just lost his throne. "What do you want? Money?" I almost laughed. They always thought everything could be monetized. "No," I said. "I'm not making this video public. Doing so would ruin your reputation. But it would also hurt Alara, and I would never do that." A flicker of hope appeared in Sterling's eyes, but I extinguished it immediately. "This USB is an insurance policy," I continued, my voice calm and firm. "If I or Alara, or anyone associated with us, has an unfortunate accident, if a rumor suddenly appears, if you try to interfere in our lives even once more, then copies of it will be automatically sent to the Ashford Group's board of directors, your partners at the Department of Defense, and a few journalists I trust." I paused, letting the threat sink in. This was the language they understood, the language of calculated destruction. Sterling was silent. He was re-evaluating me, no longer as a lowly soldier, but as an equal opponent. He moved to a tycoon's final tactic. "Bribery. You're a smart man, Caleb," he said, his voice regaining a bit of confidence. "That talent is being wasted. I can arrange a position for you, a senior security advisor in a partner corporation, a 7-figure salary, a real place in this world. He was extending an olive branch, but it was a poisoned one, a final attempt to control me, to turn me into one of them. I didn't fight for a business card, I replied, my voice icy. I fought so I would never have to bow to people like you. There was nothing left to say. The game was over. Ilara stood up, her hand finding mine. She looked her parents straight in the eyes, no longer with fear, but with a deep sadness and liberation. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice clear and steady. Those 2 words were more powerful than any of my threats. It was an undeniable truth. A new family had been formed, a new future had been decided, and it was completely out of their control. On Sterling and Meredith's faces, I didn't see the joy of people who were about to have a grandchild. I only saw the final admission of a complete failure. Their empire could control money, media, and the weak. But they couldn't control life. They had lost. They didn't contact us. No tearful calls or fake apologies. Their silence was their admission. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope from Sterling's law office arrived at our house. Inside, there was no letter. Only 2 sets of documents. The first was the full ownership transfer papers for the house we were living in Coronado. The second was the founding documents for a massive trust fund for our unborn child. Unconditionally. It wasn't a gift. It was a peace treaty, written in the only language they knew. Money and law. An attempt to buy our silence, to ensure the boundary would never be crossed again. I accepted it, not for its value, but for the meaning behind it. They had surrendered. I continued to serve in the military. The missions went on. The difference was that when I came home, I returned to a house that was truly mine. A safe haven. A fortress I had built with truth and conviction. Rowan, my daughter, was born the following spring. She had Ilara's eyes and my stubbornness. When the Ashfords visited the hospital, they kept a respectful distance. Meredith held the baby awkwardly. Sterling just watched, a complex expression on his face that I couldn't read. They brought expensive gifts and left quickly. They no longer gave advice or tried to control. Years passed. Our relationship with them settled into the polite and distant level of countries with a shared border but no alliance. When I was promoted to major, I didn't tell them, but a bottle of premium whiskey was sent to the house, along with a short card from Sterling. Congratulations. Nothing more. A few more years later, Sterling retired. He sent me an invitation to his farewell party. I didn't go. But at the end of the letter, there was a handwritten note, the handwriting of a man who had grown much older. No one could ever tame you, but I hope my grandchild will learn to stand as firm as her father. I didn't reply. I folded the letter and put it away. That evening I stood on the balcony, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. The waves still crashed on the shore, relentlessly, like the struggle between order and chaos, between control and freedom. I had won, not by destroying my enemies, not by playing by their rules. I had won by drawing a line and protecting it with everything I had. I had reestablished a steel order, not in a distant country, but right in my own family. And that was the most important victory.